we are going to go live on the YouTube, and we'll get started.
Okay.
Hello. Hello. Okay, good.
I don't look half as cool.
See, he's getting his mic.
Should we start? Should we start?
Yeah.
Thanks everybody for being here.
I do.
Do you want to? Okay, you do. No. Okay, all good.
Yes, it is your show. Welcome to the launch of On Activism, Friendships, and Fighting.
Yeah.
By Benjamin Hine Shepherd, and we'll be joined by Ron Goldberg in conversation in a moment. My name is Greg Newton. I am the co-founder, along with my lovely partner, Donnie Jokum, of the Bureau of Services Queer Division. The Bureau, for anyone who's not been here before, is an independent, all-volunteer queer bookstore. We have regular business hours, Wednesdays through Sundays from 1 to 7 p.m., and then we often stay open later on weeknights when we have events such as this. And as an all-volunteer bookstore, we depend on sales and donations to keep this machine going. So I'm going to pass a bag around. We especially encourage folks to make a donation if you know you won't be buying a book. But any way you're able to support us, we appreciate it. So there's some change in the bag. There's also a QR code for Venmo if you'd like to donate that way. So I'll pass this around.
Passing the bag.
And for anyone watching online, if you'd like to make a donation on Venmo, you can do that at BGSQD. 5 letters that are everywhere around us. If you're not already on our email list and you would like to be, you can sign up for that at the back of the room and by the register where the books are. And you'll get an email every other Monday about our upcoming events, which are many, especially right now. We are quite busy. So before I turn things over to Ben, I wanted to read a land acknowledgement. The Bureau acknowledges that our organization operates on the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape. We encourage you to join the Bureau in signing up to make a monthly donation to the American Indian Community Houses Mannahatta Fund. The Mannahatta Fund, according to its website, is an invitation to all settlers and non-native people who wish to acknowledge the legacy of theft and genocide that comprise the history of New York City and the United States. And you can find out more at mannahattafund.org. The Bureau also recognizes Palestinian liberation as a queer issue. And thank you, glad you agree. We encourage you to read our flyer that's at the back by that sign-up sheet where all the books are in the register. It's all back there, which explains why we feel it is important for queer people to speak out on behalf of Palestinians. And with that, I turn the stage over to Ben, who is raring to go.
Woo! Thank you.
Please give him a very warm welcome.
Thanks for being here, everybody. Christian. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Donnie. I mean, please support. This is like the greatest bookstore in New York City, everybody. Please buy a zine, get a book, something. I mean, independent bookstores are what makes this a really special, beautiful city. And I also like what's so wonderful. I sit here and I think about a few of the people that were in the back. The last time we did Rebel Friendships 10 years ago, right here, there were some amazing people in this room. And some people that aren't with us, but are sort of still with us. So thank you for being here. I also want to thank everybody that sat for interviews. Jay may not know he sat for an interview, but Jay is always the through line of the story. Brandon sat in Washington Square Park. Mark Milano in jail. Didn't know he's being interviewed, but the conversation went from there. So thank you for that. Thank you, everyone. And most importantly, when I saw Ron's book came out last year, I was so excited. And then I read it and devoured it. And I was so excited because not only is it the chronicle of 3 meetings a week or 4, and strategies and tactics and how do you deal with conflicts, but also the excruciating, heartbreaking part, which is when somebody you love is on their way out. And yet you still got a demo to go to, you still got drinks, you still got to go dancing, we still got to live. So this book captures the ennui of it and the beauty of it, I think, in a way that is quite powerful, and we felt it yesterday walking the streets. So anyway, thanks everybody. I'm just gonna read a little bit for like 15, 20, and then pass it over to Ron. I wanna sort of unpack all this together a little bit. I mean, this is the hardest book I've done, but the friends are what make it special. I mean, I think we all talked about it back in the back of the march yesterday. It was like a glorious, beautiful day, and it may be dark fascist times, but we have each other, and it's really important to have each other in these moments. And it makes it, I think everybody was glad. We got great weather yesterday, and Act Up 38, and we're still going strong. So part of what I love is the salutations, right? You see somebody, how do people greet you? I mean, my friend Elizabeth from Vocal would always say, "Thank you for coming to work today." I interviewed Elizabeth just before she died 5 years ago, and I was thinking about, so her mantra, "Thank you for coming to work, and don't forget to make the donuts." So I attended her funeral, and I thought Elizabeth wasn't just the salutation, she would always hug you, and every single time, and she would hug my kids, and she'd say, "You brought the stars, thank you for bringing your stars to this protest." So I sat with her, and I sat at that funeral, and I thought about her life as a harm reduction activist, as a sex worker, as a drug user, someone who advocated for reduced prices for hepatitis C medications because she wanted to live, but she also wanted housing and didn't want to leave anyone else behind. So I think about Elizabeth, and I think about a few other people along the way that I interviewed. I think about Doris Deither, another one of the interviewees from Judson Memorial Church who took on a small target. We always say take on small targets, so she took on Robert Moses. And took on Robert Moses when Robert Moses wanted to put a highway through the West Village. But she was the consummate community organizer, getting everybody involved in her issues, all the way down to like cleaning up her Christmas tree. Every year we would bring my kids and I would help her with a Christmas tree. And New York Times reported when she died, Doris Deither, full-time public citizen who by sheer gumption became a self-taught guardian of Washington Square Park and Greenwich Village preservationist. She died September 16th in the Waverly apartment where she had occupied since 1958. She was 92 years old. I think another person who sat for the interviews was no other than Elizabeth Meixels, who was sitting right back here 10 years ago. Everybody remembers Sister Mary Conolingus. And Elizabeth is the one that brought me into the affinity groups. So there's the fun part of the Act Up, right? And Elizabeth is still battling the Nazi nutso psycho wing fascists, and we're still at it. I can't say it, but I still am thinking about Elizabeth. So there's so many. The affinity groups were what I wanted to write about with the first Rebel Friendships book. And I wanted to valorize the affinity groups, but then things got a little weird, And I told Stanley about my affinity groups, and he said, "Great, it's nice to have your friends, Ben, but you need organization." And I was like, no, that makes me think about Max Weber, the cold iron cage of despair. I don't want to work at a big organization. I want to meet my friends at the demos. But he said, you have to think about the friends, but you have to think about the organization and why do your friendships crumble apart, and why do the affinity groups crumble apart after 3 or 4 years or 5 years or 10 years? And of course, Stanley's like, okay, well, if you're thinking about fights, friendship and fights, think about Stalin and Trotsky. And I was like, that's not really the resolution that I want, okay? I don't want someone getting stabbed to death for trying to work through this. So, not that it's all about the dead, but Stanley died right after that conversation in 2021, and the book continued. The point is, our efforts are limited when the tent gets too small, too restricted, when we get too critical of each other. And I think that's the question. How do we open up our tent? How do we open up the bigger conversation to have more power? We had a lot of people yesterday, and I think I'd like to think about it being bigger, but the conflict is everywhere, and that's what I'm trying to make sense of. When I look at the history of friendships, Karl Marx and Engels, Marx was always just begging for money from Engels. So I think when Engels' mother died, he's like, well, look, dude, you have problems, I need money. And it's like his mother died, okay? So there was a little bit of conflict there. Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, they always complained who's not sharing thoughts with who as we're hiking together. Simone de Beauvoir and her childhood friend Jaja, book after book of the asymmetry of friendship. On and on and on. It's fine to have battles around who's in charge of publicity, but to do it on public radio as Eldridge Cleaver and Huey Newton did, that was heavy, right? So it's not new, these fights. Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud killed each other in these long letters about why they were agonizing over their friendship. So I think Adorno told Walter Benjamin, your poetry is not dialectical, okay? So like, I mean, bitchy, mean, but this is part of the history of our philosophy. So, we go through these conflicts. Two souls live in me, alas, irreconcilable with one another, Goethe said in Faust. Sometimes we all feel that way. We have our conflicts, our Oedipal struggles, and then we play them out publicly. The phenomena happens over and over in our movement friendships. We idealize our comrades, and this leads us to disappointment. What do you do when a friend has blind spots or biases? Well, the pursuit of full humanity, said Paulo Freire, cannot be carried out in isolation or individualism, but only in fellowship and in solidarity. Therefore, it cannot unfold in the antagonistic relations between oppressor and oppressed. No one can be authentically human while he or she prevents others from being so. So I spent a decade interviewing my movement friends, about their conflicts, the sex wars that gave Mark Milano gray hairs in ACT UP, the purity contests, the Cotton Mather finger wagging, scolding, debates over reform versus revolution. Andrew Boyd and I talked about the billionaires for Bush or Gore versus the people that liked Al Gore. The swim team in ACT UP, the oh-so-brilliant treatment and data committee with their MacArthur Genius grants, the Summer Hoppers in Reclaim the Streets and the Global Justice Movement, the Occupy insiders who seem to dominate the spokes councils. Claire recalled feeling like she was in high school again, not getting picked on to play. Emily recalled groups actually trying to take out each other's affinity groups. Others simply scolded, pushing sympathizers out of movements over mask use or failure to use the right lefty speak. So what do? Don't call people out, call people in. Loretta Piles talks about this. Listen to them. When we call them out, Naomi Klein points out on Doppelganger, they're more than happy, the right wing is more than happy to pull them right in. And go on the radio talk shows and Steve Bannon will say how courageous you are. But there's also like the petty jealousies. Every time a friend succeeds, I die a little. Orvidal said it, and I feel the same way. So in the years since I published Rebel Friendships, the friendships and affinity groups ran their course or they splintered. We faced a war over immigrants and outsiders, threats to democracy, climate chaos. The stakes were high. There were fights over tactics, strategy, arguments over ideology, Hillary versus Bernie. Friends turned, solidarities crumbled, friendships became strained, social ties were severed, social media confirming points of view emphasized differences. There's nothing more alienating, says Laura Berlant, than having your pleasures disputed by someone with a theory. You've all been there. You've all been there in ACT UP. So some friends disappeared, but others talked, shared, and worked it through. For the Icarus Project, friendships are the best medicine. Conversely, self-righteousness was a glaring weakness, say Moore and Tracy in No Fascist USA. But it's a refrain we hear over and over and over again. We tended to out-left each other, says Laura Whitehorn. It's the hardest book I wrote. When I was doing it, I guess in psychotherapy, they call it an enactment, when you bring down the external conflict that you're having in the world into the therapy session. So I had several interviewees that stopped the interview and walked out. Okay, and and still we don't talk. I got ghosted. I got X'd. Let's see. There was when I said Rise and Resists versus Antifa. One person was like, "Oh, you can't say that." Okay, another one that the old golden oldie is we can have affordable housing and green space and community gardens, so you don't have to bulldoze Elizabeth Street Garden. I have friends that are gone in my life from that debate. Okay, so we continue to bring these external conflicts into our debates. They brought them into the book. I kept the interviews for most of them. But anyway, okay. So we have this myth, this debate that it repeats itself over and over and over again, like the arguments in Magic Mountain. And we don't really know what the resolution will be, but hopefully we can listen to each other. So I fell in love with the movement, out of love with the movement, back in love with the movement, on and on. And so here we are. Few highlights. When we were in Berlin, my friend Alessandra said, okay, Angela Davis is speaking today. And I was like, and I don't get too starstruck for people, but I sat there in Orianaplatz and I watched Angela Davis say the refugee crisis is a consequence of capitalism. Freedom is a constant struggle. And I'm cavelling, okay? It's Angela Davis. So Angela Davis talks about this big picture about structural racism, but looking at racism being a structural problem, not an individual problem. And then she turns to the crowd and she says, but guess what? When I was in jail, you saved my life. I'm standing in for movements because you saved my life. The Million Roses for Angela campaign, you got me out of jail. So thank you for that. So again, I think we can fumble toward repair. We can forgive each other. We can look out for each other because our movements do save us. And it's something to be reported on again and again. So how did I do it? For 100 interviews, I asked people, how did you get into organizing? And for some people, I mean, for Caroline, it was poverty. For Bertha Lewis, it was racism. Andrew Boyd, nukes. Steve Duncombe, racism. Michelle O'Brien, transphobia. Andrew Velez, homophobia. Bertha Lewis from the Black Institute pointed out something, and I thought she was channeling Velez when she says this. She says, I was born in 1951. I'm dead smack in the middle of the civil rights movement, dogs and fire hoses, then 63, the March on Washington. We were very poor. I was born in a fork in the river in St. Johns County, Florida. My parents were migrant workers. My birth certificate says I was born colored, grew up Negro, was called African American, then chose to be Black. You have to understand that first of all, my race, my ethnicity, my gender, my age. I couldn't do anything else. It was destiny. Inevitably, given that, I became an English and theater major, okay? So, I was going to fight the revolution by doing musicals. So, you know, she loved Jesus Christ Superstar. It was big time, but white. But it's the struggle between good and evil. We all have an antagonist and a protagonist, and you have parts with many different characters. You have the beginning, the middle, and the end, and you have a revolution to flip. I think that's why theater people are drawn to that. And I mean, looking at a room of people that are involved in an organization started by a theater person, I think we all kind of understand drama is important, right? So I saw Jennifer Flynn yesterday, and Jennifer Flynn Walker, and Jennifer added to this story yesterday, but Jennifer talked about a similar sort of loyalty with the Fed Up Queers, the late 1990s Queer Direct Action Collective. The people in Fed Up Queers are like my ride or die crew, said Flynn. I would die for any of them. I call it my gay high school. It's the people who really know me at my worst and are still come around. Walker gave an example of this kind of friendship. Korn and I had this brief dating thing, and then we started dating. They started dating someone else, and we were not talking. And then we had this thing like ride or die, and we're supposed to set an effigy of Giuliani on fire. Korn got grabbed, and we had this thing where if a girl gets arrested, we all go to the system together. So I was the girl who happened to be standing closest. I avoided Korn the whole day, but I had to get arrested, so she couldn't be alone. So Korn gets arrested and handcuffed, and I have to make myself arrested. They don't want to arrest me, so I had to throw myself around and being horizontal and kicking around. And finally, Jennifer got arrested, and we were sitting next to each other, and we started talking. We had a desk appearance ticket, and instead of being put through the system together, it was really hot out. We went to the beach and had this magical beach day and made a fire out there. And Jennifer told me yesterday, and this isn't on the record, but they were all stopping. They were all frisked, but it was a really hot arresting officer doing the hostage frisk, you know. And so, you know, that's also can be part of it. Hi, Bob. Glad you're here. So, you know, remember life is long, said Bertha Lewis, reflecting on the lessons of history and activism. Organizers have to learn the math. Power is about either you can be famous or have power, or of course you can be rich and have power, or else you can have power in numbers, said Lewis, recognizing activism as a Sisyphean endeavor. We lose 9 times out of 10. Now, can you deal with that, or are you going to become depressed? We have to knock on 60 doors to get in and talk to 10 in order to sign up 2. That's the math. The odds are overwhelming. The hours are long. The pay is low. You wonder, am I doing the right thing? And God damn it, if you sit down and talk with somebody, they're going to lift you up. I've been at this now for 30 years. My biggest mentors have been the people who I've organized with, who have struggled for years and are still standing. I aspire to be their mentor, to have someone say, Bertha Lewis taught me something. In the hood, we call it ride or die. These are the people who can ride out any problem. Now, inevitably, the interviewees dealing with problems came into conflict with each other. Differences of opinion are enacted. Orwell reported Alex Comfort movements tried to create safer spaces, struggling with mediation and the very idea of safety, people being called out, accountability, exposing the limitations. As Ryan Dahlstrom says, by making these public attacks on each other, we're engaging in the same disposability politics of capitalism that we purport to be against, feeding into state surveillance tactics that are monitoring how we're tearing each other down. At a panel on immigrant organizing at the 2018 Anarchist Book Fair, Jack Vimo talks about Sylvia Rivera and said Sylvia would have been kicked out, would have been canceled in the movement because Sylvia had a big mouth, was a real person. So Sarah Schulman in her interview for this book talks about being dogged on the road and people saying you're transphobic. You know, you're and Sarah's like, can I talk to you? Can you please talk about this stuff? So there's a lot of trauma out there. Whether we mean it or not, we tend to replicate the difficulties we had growing up. There are a lot of harm families have handed down. We come from fucked up families bringing this into our work. There is a real power to having your story connected to others, says Sasha Altman de Bruhl. It's a challenge to hold onto the good parts and let go of the other parts. It's like we're all living in this hall of mirrors. Traumatized backgrounds lead to black and white thinking. You find it in movements, a lot of black and white thinking. One of the skills is stepping out of your point of view. How do you teach empathy? That really eats at movements. People compete over pain. I've had to do a lot of stepping out of my shoes. I just don't engage with people who are in black and white thinking. Themes of resolution and dialogue, talking it out with each other, run throughout the story. Working through as activists grapple with questions about targets. We rehash the same injury, the same wound, same fight over and over. Grieving is also part of it. It was the same errors over and over that play out again and again and again. This was the case, I mean, last summer at the Kathy Otterstein funeral. That was so incredible to actually be in that space where people were publicly talking about working through that. It was quite beautiful, and it was like I was still in the revision page of the book, and I was able to add, I think, a little bit. I mean, Alexis had this incredible eulogy there. So we're still trying to make it through this. There's always the question about where do you find meaning? You know, and Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning talks about this. Where do we find meaning in this struggle? And of course, you know, one of my favorite interviews that I interviewed Andy Velez for several of the books was Andy Velez, and I interviewed him right before he shuffled off in 2019, and I think it was February 14th of May 2019 at the age of 80, and Velez said, until there's a cure, I won't be able to cross the street to avoid someone I don't like working with, he said back in the 90s. I have an invisible list of names, and when the epidemic is over, I will never have to speak to any of them again, said Velez. I asked Velez about this, and he said, well, that was then. I don't feel that way now. I asked him, how come? Well, I think I've become kinder and gentler, and I'm much more forgiving. There's still people that I think are jerks, and I don't want to waste any time talking with them, but in activism, you don't have to like everyone. You just have to be willing to do the work. I always thought, what is it we need to do? And very often when I'm at a meeting and it's going off the rails because people are getting caught up in stuff, I'm good at stepping in and saying, can we please get back to where the point is? So I think about Andy and his pearls, all the ACT UP meetings. How many people went to more ACT UP meetings than Andy? I mean, I don't know. It's a hard to, you know, it's a lot of Mondays. It's a lot of patience, okay? So what are the lessons? Love each other or die, as Auden said during World War II, before he renounced his poem, September 1st, 1939, and it was published. Still, friendship has changed, and so have we. How do we allow difference? All too often, the old partisan scold, the wagging finger reemerges. We're not inclusive. Give people grace. There's going to be different times for different people and friendships. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Ron.
Fuck you!
Ron. Take your time. Let's have fun. Thank you.
Okay, like, what I was going to read is like completely irrelevant now too, so I'm like, you wanna just sit here and chat?
That's fine. I mean, it's your time.
All right, so this is my time. So what I was, because this is a weird, well, hi, everybody, thank you for coming.
Hi.
This was me with hair, boy with the bullhorn. I was champ queen of ACT UP, for those of you, that was my unofficial title. I was going to talk initially about friendship, sort of following this story of a friend or two sort of through the progression, and then today evolved into this sort of memorial sandwich.
Yeah.
I just came from Troy Masters Memorial at 1 and at what, 4? We're all going down.
4:30.
4:30. We're all going down to Nanette's, and I just kind of felt like I want to talk about the joy of activism instead, rather than the whole journey. And I want to say that this book is a memoir as well as a history. So the history I'm telling in these stories, yes, they happened, they're cited and everything, but it's also my experience of it. And particularly when you talk about the social life within ACT UP it's very particular, right? I mean, the note about it being high school, I even say it. It was high school in a lot of ways. But also for gay people, we didn't get the same high school. So it was that experience to sort of, we could be the cool kids, or we could be this, and so a lot of that is this. So I'm just gonna read anyway. So I'm gonna jump around a bit. A lot of you, this will be kind of familiar. Every Monday night at 7:30 in the first floor assembly hall at the Lesbian and Gay Community Services Center was packed with short-haired muscle boys and power dykes, stockbrokers in suits and carpenters in flannel, writers, actors, graphic designers, college students, and who's that?
No.
The room was long and narrow and studded by thin support columns that separated the punched tin ceiling from the gray-green checkerboard floor below. A couple hundred drab gray metal folding chairs, mostly filled, were spread across the room in 3 sections, 6 to 10 rows deep, with just enough space along the back and side walls for standing and schmoozing. There was an information table at the back, stacked with flyers and fact sheets, and a merchandise table in the front, larded with buttons and t-shirts. I should say I picked one of the configurations of the room. For those of you who were there, we went from one side to the other side. I just want to footnote that. It was dingy, it remained dingy. It was a dingy, badly lit institutional space in desperate need of a paint job, and it was the most exciting place in town. Welcome to ACT UP, this will be familiar. Welcome to ACT UP, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. We are a diverse, nonpartisan group of individuals united in anger and committed to direct action to end the AIDS crisis. We protest and demonstrate, we meet with government and public health officials, we research and distribute the latest medical information. We are not silent. Monday nights were the beating heart of ACT UP, our forum and town hall meetings. They were long, loud, and loaded with process. Everyone had input, and God knows everyone had an opinion. Yet, week after week, zaps were planned, strategies discussed, and information imparted. While most of the day-to-day work might have been carried out by our committees and caucuses, the general membership, the floor of our weekly meetings, was ACT UP's main deliberative body. While Monday night meetings could be maddening, filled with circular discussions and endless pontifications, they could also turn quite thrilling when someone, Bob Rafsky, Greg Bordowitz, or Maxine Wolf, among countless others, would capture the moment or articulate as if for the first time some profound and instantly recognizable truth. Every week I learned something new, not just about science and semiotics, but also about myself and my relationship to the world. And if I didn't immediately grasp the nuances of each issue or intuit which course of action might be best, I knew that if I listened long enough, I'd be able to figure it out. It remains, without question, the smartest room I've ever been in. Even at its most frustrating, there was always an undeniable energy and churn to our meetings, with dozens of side conversations taking place at the margins of the room or over cigarettes in the courtyard. Monday nights were also a time to socialize, a chance to gossip, flirt, and commiserate. And then there was the cruising. Not that everyone regarded ACT UP exclusively as a dating service, but even if they came for the boys or the girls, it's not why they stayed. It was our passion that was sexy, our commitment to doing work, saving lives, and changing the world. Getting laid was simply a bonus. Over the years, ACT UP, and this is particular, ACT UP over the years would have several social hubs. There was Woody's. I just jumped over the Woody's piece. That's what I wanted to do. Yeah. Hold on, sorry. Woody's. That went here. Well, here it is. Right, the next section. When the meeting was over, usually just before 11 o'clock, several dozens of us would reconvene over at Woody's for a couple of beers and a late night snack. Woody's was the best place to find out what was really going on in ACT UP. No matter the intensity of the day's arguments, you'd find us all laughing and flirting around a makeshift hydra-headed banquet table in the back. It's where problems were aired and proposals floated, stories told and gossip shared. It's where we first pieced together the ACT UP food chain, Jay, diagramming who slept with whom. And it's where Bradley Ball and I would choke with laughter as we madly sang our way through the ACT UP songbook. Bradley was ACT UP's elected secretary and unofficial head mistress. Think Maggie Smith in the prime of Miss Jean Brodie. Give me an activist at an impressionable age, and he's mine for life. As an autodidact with a bone-dry wit, he'd somehow managed the neat trick of being both off-putting and beloved. Bradley had been one of the unaffiliated masses who somehow found their way to the community center that fateful night to hear Larry's speech. 2 days later, when the new group began to brainstorm issues and demonstration targets, he volunteered to write down the suggestions on a big sketch pad. When the meeting was over, Bradley was literally left holding the pad. So he ripped off the pages, typed up the notes, and distributed copies at the next meeting. He'd been taking notes ever since. Our friendship was predicated, at least initially, on our ability to keep up with one another's show queen references. Sitting at Woody's, we'd often laugh ourselves breathless, careening from show to show. Evita, he'd shout, and we would be off singing Don't Cry for Me, Tony Fauci. Little orphan Annie would arrive in the big city hospital and belt, AZT, what is it about you? While Larry Kramer, taking the Paul Lynde role in Bye Bye Birdie, would wax poetic about his upcoming appearance on Phil Donahue, I'm gonna be on Phil Donahue. Guys and Dolls naturally became Guys and Guys, with Miss Adelaide lamenting her series of opportunistic infections, and Nicely Johnson touting his latest AIDS treatments. I got the drug right here, it's called acyclovir, and though it's used for herpes, I have no fear. Yeah. When particularly inspired, I'd expand these snippets into full-length parodies, which we'd then perform at ACT UP parties and talent shows. We'd stay at Woody's through the last call, only to reassemble on the sidewalk, still talking, shouting, and laughing. Even though we'd been together for hours, and would probably see each other again in a matter of days, if that long, we'd cling together, glowing in each other's company and hating to say goodnight. Over the years, ACT UP would have a number of social hubs. There was Woody's, and later Benny's Burritos for after-meeting margaritas, the East Village Hangs, the Bar, the Wonder Bar, and Crowbar, and sensing a threat, a theme. And then the dance clubs, the Whirl, Mars, and Meet. But at least in the early years, if there was an ACT UP party, it was probably at Maria's, and this is, again, my own experience. Maria Magenti lived on East 10th Street in Alphabet City, across from Tompkins Square Park, at the height of its homeless, anarchist, drug dealer, drag queen heyday. I never remembered Maria's apartment number, and since there were no names on the downstairs buzzer, I'd keep pressing buttons until someone buzzed me in. Then it was just a matter of following the noise up a couple of flights and knocking on the door covered with ACT UP stickers. Yeah. We would gather at Maria's several times a year for holiday and pride parties, to celebrate demonstrations and commiserate after elections. There was admittedly a bit of a status issue around Maria's parties, with invitees sarcastically referred to as the A-list for those who felt left out. And if all of this sounds like high school, it says it right here, you wouldn't be wrong. We were, I guess, the in crowd, the movers and shakers, the one who ran the meetings and the committees and regularly spoke up on the floor. And Maria was ACT UP's golden girl. Maria was always hot and crowded, her small 3-room apartment awash in beer, cigarettes, and politics. There was a bathtub in the kitchen, which, when covered with an old wooden door, doubled as a bar. And then in the far corner, a tiny WC with a sign reminding the guys to please put the seat down when they were finished. Yeah. Doubling back, there was a small book-lined hallway / second bedroom, which led to the brick-walled living room / primary bedroom, overlooking the park. On one particularly hot Saturday evening, Maria's was packed as usual, and the night wore on, it became increasingly hot and sultry in her unair-conditioned apartment. Among the sweltering guests was a particularly attractive subset of ACT UP's notorious boys in black. Yes, this is how the swim team got its name.
Yeah.
With their chiseled good looks and gym-toned bodies, they were a strutting advertisement for the healthful benefits of AIDS activism. And with their powerfully sexualized outlaw style, think Marlon Brando and the Wild One with Doc Martens, political stickers, and a couple of extra earrings, quickly became the new gay uniform, the perfect response to years of illness and an increasingly pathologized sexuality. On a dare, the boys, including my friend David Serco, who, though not an East Village denizen, easily made the cut, left the party for a spontaneous swim in the park fountain. When they returned to the party 15 minutes later in nothing but wet t-shirts and wet tighty-whities, conversations stopped. Temperatures rose. Henceforth, in lust and admiration, we simply called them the swim team. One final, I'm gonna actually jump to this one and then we'll finish here. On January 8th, 1989, ACT UP took over the world. The World was a huge dance club that had been carved out of a rundown theater and catering hall on the far edge of the East Village. A thumping hive of slumming artists, designers, club kids, neighborhood fags, drag queens, and banjee boys. It was where house music went after the demise of the Paradise Garage. And that's a quote. I wouldn't say that. The MC for that evening's ACT UP benefit was none other than cable TV porn star diva Robin Bird.
Oh, yeah.
There we go. Let's hear it for the girl.
Yeah.
Bird and her well-worn macrame bikini hosted a self-named public access talk show featuring gyrating strippers of both sexes, culminating in a dancing bump and grope festival to her tone-challenged recording of Baby Let Me Bang Your Box. It was a trashy, sexy, only in New York wonder, and like many, I tuned in regularly.
Yeah.
For entertainment, Bird had brought a cadre of go-go boys and porn stars, including ACT UP members, Jake Corbin and Joey Stefano, who spent the evening dancing on tables, swinging from lighting fixtures in one of the smaller party rooms. It was a wild night, a combination of safe sex club, dance party, and political rally, divinely decadent and defiantly alive. And somehow, I was a part of it. Growing up, I'd always fantasized about being in one of those places where it was happening. You know, a magical moment when a certain someplace became the center of the universe. You know, the movable feast of Paris in the 20s, mid-century modern Manhattan, or San Francisco during the summer of love. Those places that defined the world or a time when you looked back, it seemed like everyone was there. That was ACT UP in 1989. I mean, I don't know if we helped create the cultural moment or were simply swept up in it, but we saw our reflection cast back at us in the galleries of the New Museum and the holiday windows of Barney's, in the dance music of D-Light, Jimmy Somerville, Prince, and Madonna, at Wigstock, the drag shows at the Pyramid, and at the performance art in the kitchen and PS 122. The line between art, politics, and queer life was growing increasingly thin, and no one walked that tightrope better or with more style than ACT UP. That I ever found myself there remains one of the wonders of my life. Having a schmooze?
Yeah, schmooze. Tell Mark tells us we have to run downstairs. So, how did you balance it? Because I finished the chapter about David's funeral the other day, and there's the gripping moment when you've gone through days and days and days of, there was a job in between that, right? There was actually a paid gig in between. So you're going to event after event, you're going to the hospital, you're going to work, you're going to a funeral, you look across the room and you see your old professor, and then it all comes crashing down. And this is in the midst of intense ACT UP stuff. So how do you balance all that? How did you?
It's in the writing or the living.
There's no choice, right? I mean, I don't know.
It was interesting. Deb Levine, who was another ACT UP comrade, was an early reader of the book, and she was like, you're gonna have to explain to people that you could go because there was one scene where it was like, I had 3 friends in the hospital, in different hospitals. And I was visiting a friend in St. Vincent's, because I picked St. Vincent's on Monday because that was across from the ACT UP meeting. And you're gonna have to explain how you could go from the hospital to a meeting, or from a hospital to a party or to dancing, and it's like, that's just how it was. And it was important to do it was just part of the thing for the day. It was like, Monday was Michael at St. Vincent's, I visited Bradley and I think Gary, they were both at St. Luke's Roseville, I could visit them at the same time, and that was Tuesday, and Wednesday I couldn't go, and then, Thursday Michael died. So it was just sort of like, it was how our lives were, and it was just so integrated into our life. But part of it is also, I'm an expert compartmentalizer.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether that, was engendered while I was doing this, or I, grew up with it to some extent. But, so you focused on this, and then you went and did this, and you just tried to keep the rooms separate.
Did you, no, this is I don't want to grill you, I'm just saying, but there's a moment when there's a real disagreement. I mean, and I think one of my favorite parts of the book is, I interviewed both Jim Igo and Mark Milano about some of the sex wars stuff.
Yeah.
When I first came to New York, the sex panic stuff was
Yeah.
intense. Friendships, people were walking to be on the other side of the street if somebody, around this stuff. So was there a moment for you where it stopped being cute? And I'm not saying it was ever cute, but I'm saying because people were dying. But was there a moment when where there was 1 or 2 activists when somebody wasn't a good fight? I mean, because that's what we've talked about. There are moments when we can disagree about policy, but if I start calling you a name or saying something, like, how did you handle that?
There are definitely people who I didn't see eye to eye with.
Yeah.
People who I felt were destructive. It was a very dramatic group, and we had some very destructive personalities.
Yeah.
There's no question about that.
Yeah.
When I was writing the book, I worked very hard to, give them their roses.
Yeah.
It was important, they showed up, and I had to respect that. So I pulled a couple of punches in a couple of places, but there were people who I felt were really, really destructive. I don't think it was, with one exception, I think, wasn't out of just there being terrible people.
Right.
But there is this need to prove that.
Out lefty.
Yeah, I mean, I used to joke, I said, I know I'm taking a vacation, I'm going to Fire Island. I know that my share on Fire Island I'm able to do that because my heel is on the neck of somebody less, fortunate,
Yeah.
but it's like, sorry, I gotta go. And there was that. And also, I think what happened with ACT UP, and we've talked about this to some extent, this is my theory at any rate, is as we got more popular, initially we weren't really ideological. It was just, there was a lot of and. You could do this, and you could do that, and you could do this. At a point, 1990, 1991, when the bombs kept dropping over our heads, and people kept dying, and nothing we were doing seemed to put an end to that. We also got other people who were coming in with ideology and whatever, and so it became or. And that was, you were either, like, for instance, like treatment and data, right? It was like if you weren't working on the medicine stuff, you were wasting our time.
Yeah.
Or if you didn't look at, on the converse side, if you didn't look at the larger the larger piece and whatever, I don't care if you're fighting for your life, if you're not fighting for the whole thing, then you're a bad person.
Yeah.
So it became or. We couldn't do and anymore, and that became problematic.
Yeah.
Well said.
Well said. But I would want to hear from everybody because we have a great crowd of people here. I think Andy Velez said, and he was at the panel for the Rebel Friendships, sitting right here. So and I'm going to keep on talking about that because I was so grateful for him to share his time with us like that for so long. But he was able to articulate. David Feinberg would come into meetings and say, "You've not You haven't done
I'm
anything.
still dying.
You
What
haven't
are
done anything.
You failed.
You're a failure. Now, what do you say? And Andy would say, well, it wasn't for lack of trying. Okay,
Right.
I
Yeah,
mean,
no.
and yet David Feinberg is the one that got me in San Francisco through all the crisis because I was laughing. I was able to
David's
laugh. I was able to
books-
laugh at the absurdity of our moment there.
David's books, I made it a point of not rereading
Yeah.
David's books when I was writing because
Yeah.
I'm a mimic and I didn't want to pick up
Yeah.
his voice. I remember being at the Barnes and Noble on 8th Street and picking up 86
Yeah.
in hardcover and just looking at it, and he was calling Hell's Kitchenette because that was where I was living
Yeah,
too.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, this book. And I think his writing captures something about the time and the whole feeling that is just so unique and so true. And if you don't have a copy of it, please buy it here.
Buy a copy
Buy a
here.
copy. Yes, he has several books, Fear and Loathing, there's a whole,
Whose
it's,
dick do you have to suck to get arrested around?
oh
here?
my God,
Right.
yeah.
Okay,
It's,
so
David
eternal
was
lines.
incredible that way, but it's, sorry, I went flying off topic, but, which I will do.
Yeah.
Um,
No, just trying to think, how do we navigate that? Like we have those differences, and then when does it become? I mean, and there are ACT UP members that are Republicans that I've pictures of, and then I think, did you vote for Trump? And you were an ACT, and that's intense.
Yeah.
And yet here I'm preaching about having a Big Tent and being tolerant of people and being able to agree to disagree, but I'm not as good at
I'm gonna put in a theater
Yeah.
reference because I'm a theater
Yeah,
queen.
yeah.
So very famously, Fiddler on the Roof, right? You had
Yeah.
Zero Mostel, who was blacklisted.
Yeah.
And you had, and then and it was done by Jerome Robbins, who named names, right? And it's like, how can you
Yeah.
work with him? It's like, I can work with him, I don't have to eat with him. And that's actually the line I drew
Yeah.
for myself in ACT UP. There were
Yeah.
certain people who I could work with, but I don't have to sit down and have a meal with them.
Yeah.
And I didn't.
Okay. That's the question. That's the question. Well, was it fun writing it? Was it a fun rabbit hole, or was it exhausting?
It was both. I mean,
Yeah.
I started writing it because I had to figure out what the fuck what we lived through. I mean, it was just, I started writing this book in 1995, I want to say.
Yeah.
I was just sort of drifting out of ACT UP, and I was trying to sort of, okay, let's put this together. What was this? And I still have, as my husband will testify, boxes and files of all sorts of stuff. And so I tried to put it together, and I wrote an outline and whatever, and I had an agent, Jed Mattis, which was terrific,
Great.
and you couldn't sell the book for love or money. No one was interested. This was actually before the cocktail.
Yeah.
And a bunch of queer books had died on the vine. So I then started working on the timeline, which I have, which is this ACT UP timeline, which is, and it's on the boywithabullhorn.com website.
Yeah.
And it's got sort of what was going on internally, what the demonstrations were going on, what was going on in the AIDS world, what was going on in the some key events in the real world, and then who died. And it covers from 1987 to 1995. And it isn't everything, but it's got a lot of it. And that was sort of the structure. And I put aside the book and was working on that for a long time, and then I was turning 50. My life is not subtle. I actually used to hide in a closet in my bedroom. Subtle. I just was like, I'm turning 50, I'm working at a law firm trying to make more money for lawyers. No, this
Yeah.
doesn't seem to be fulfilling. And so I went back and worked on the book, and I worked on it a lot. It took another
Yeah.
13 years. It was a privilege.
Yeah.
I mean, it was tough at times, but it was a responsibility I felt very firmly. It was an honor. And I got to read the oral histories, which are amazing because, we worked together, but we didn't really know each other. We knew each other in a very different way. I knew that I could trust you. I knew that I could be in the street, you'd be, sort of what, talk about if I got busted, someone would take a bust with me.
Yeah.
We'd be okay. But I didn't know what you did for a living. I didn't know that, oh, you were doing this because your lover died. Oh, I didn't know any of this. And to read the oral histories and to sort of be able to sort of get to know people. I mean, I remember, Jamie, reading your story, just like, oh my God, you know, what an incredible person. I mean, why didn't I know this? Not that I didn't know you were an incredible person, but, you know, but it was just, it was a...
Now, final question, and I'll stop. Really, like, what about Jay's outline? What about is that out there anywhere?
Jay's outline?
Outline of the.
Oh,
Like the Go Fish, the Go Fish.
food chain.
Yeah. It's probably
It's
not.
around.
It's around.
It's,
Okay.
I've seen it.
Okay.
I wasn't on it, by the way. I was ancillary, though
Okay.
I
Okay.
you know.
Did that help?
What, the food chain? No,
Yeah.
no, I mean, I didn't, it's not that kind of a book.
Okay.
I talk about my own picadillos. I really don't go into, and that was a thing too. It was also like, okay, who do I talk about? And, you know, for people who were not affiliated with ACT UP, whatever, I only used first names.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't my place. ACT UP, if it was in your oral history, you have first and last name. And I made sure everybody was in the, unlike some, I made sure there was an index so people could find themselves. And even if you're in the footnotes, you're in the index.
Oh, yeah.
The book is available in the back.
That's true.
Mark, good
I
to
have to
see you.
leave to prepare for the
Yeah.
next memorial.
Thank
I'll
you,
say
Mark.
one thing before I go. I want to agree with you and disagree with you.
Okay.
Because, first of all, ACT UP was just about the most important thing that ever happened to me. It transformed me as a person. It changed my life. I cannot be more grateful for being in ACT UP for over 25 years.
Yeah.
At the same time, it was very painful. And I disagree with you about the and and the or, because I
Okay.
joined in '88, and I found right from the start that there was a party line. And if you disagreed on an issue, the sex club was later, but even early on,
Right.
if I disagreed, I remember one person who had a big crush on me, and we disagreed on an issue, and he never spoke to me again, you know? And so I found that
Yeah.
you had to toe on certain things the party line. Now, I, on the other hand, was like you. A lot of people I hated, but I said, until this is over, I will always work with you. And I worked with people I couldn't stand for years. Other people, though, refused to do actions with me because we disagreed on a particular issue. And
Yeah.
that I thought was terrible.
Yeah.
So it was a love-hate. It
Yeah.
turned me in. I mean, I shouted down, you know, presidential candidates and stuff, which I never could have done before I
Right.
joined that.
Right.
So I loved it, but on an interpersonal level, it was tough, right? I mean.
And I remember seeing you getting dragged up by the police when the war started on Fifth Avenue. That it was incredible.
And I organized that. I
Right.
did that.
And so, I mean, incredible courage. And I think that's the part that it's like, how do people have that kind of courage?
Yeah, ACT UP was amazing for instilling courage in people, but it was
Absolutely.
painful in terms of how people treated you. I mean,
Yeah,
you know, so thanks for the book, thanks for you.
Thanks.
Are they gonna have your book here?
it's gonna be here.
I'm gonna come back and buy it, I'm gonna get an autograph, right?
You got it. I'm here all afternoon. Thank you, Mark. I'll be down in a
I'll
minute.
see you
See you all at
Yeah.
4:30, right?
Yeah.
Good
First
to see you,
floor.
Mark. Good to see you, Mark.
First floor.
What time is it? Do we have time? What time is it now? Let's see, do we have four.
Okay.
So do people have chit chat questions? Do they have questions, or do you guys want to go to break up and go downstairs? What do people want? What's the energy? Stay and chat? All right. What like?
It's Anna, we could chat.
And
Let me go then. It's an and.
get
Exactly.
downstairs by 40. Christian. Everybody knows Christian, right? Interior Leather Bar. The jaws to great
I
glass.
have a question, since you compiled all this info, I'm an activist and I just got canceled by my group. And,
You got canceled?
yeah, so how do you like, you know, disarm this sort of thing or de-escalate or what, because you know all this stuff, you've seen it happen so many times, so is there a way to like resolve stuff?
I think, I mean, Loretta Piles, I do think being able to say, let's call people in. Let's have a, I mean, look, if somebody, there's certain lines I'm not gonna, you know, I don't wanna cross, but I think generally speaking, we've gotta be allowed to be able to talk with people. And the people that canceled me, that ghosted me when I was, while doing interviews about this book, like, yeah, that's sad. But some people, you can't force reconciliation. There are different times for different relationships. That's what Reginald said, and it really helped.
Yeah.
Reginald from ACT UP and Vocal, he said, like, you can be friends now, but that friendship might run its course, and you can't force it. But as Bertha said, later in life, you never know who's you're gonna need to be your friend. You never know. So like saying I don't need to be friends with half the people, you may find yourself in a lonely position. So I think we've got to find a way to tolerate each other a little bit. But if somebody doesn't want, I don't know, it's like if I've gotten fired by jobs, and sometimes you have to be able to say, well, I quit before you fired me. I don't want to be with you. I don't know. When is there that moment when you're just like, you're better off not with somebody? If they don't want you around, if they don't want you at the party, Christian, I don't know. I think it's that's more on them.
I'm okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Don't worry about me. I'm good. I've got my people, right?
Yeah.
I start new groups, which
Yeah.
I like to do. But how do I like can't beat them, join them sort of thing, like they just won't have anything to do with me right now. No talking. That's what you said was hit the nail on the head. There is no room for talking. They don't want to hear my side, and it's just and sucks.
Detached with love.
Yeah. Yes. Like I think other people have.
I just wanted, I'm feeling this, the theme that I'm getting is alienation.
Yeah.
You have friendships and you have relationships that you tolerate to get things done, and then there's a point where you actually sabotage your goals because you alienate the people. So I think you guys have talked about mobilizing people to create action. That is a skill that we're learning from reading in all your memoirs. But what I'm saying is if you piss somebody off, often if you piss me off, make me do something better. Because I have to evaluate why you made me so angry. And then I go past the anger to a possible resolution or solution, but not necessarily a relationship.
Yeah. I mean, I still think it's also good to get on the phone. Barbara always says, right? Like, let's get on the horn and actually talk with somebody. I think there's something to be, actually communicate if something's going down. Because
that's what you're doing right now.
Right.
Without a phone.
Right. Be able to just actually talk. So.
I mean, I think
Jamie?
it's.
Jamie? Oh, yeah, sorry.
I was gonna say, I mean, part of it is also just, we were lucky in that ACT UP happened pre-digital.
Yeah.
We had to be in a room. We had to see each other every week. You knew you were gonna, I mean, that was sort of the Woodies thing, is that it was like, okay, you could be fighting with Peter or whoever, and then you'd be at the table with them. And there's something about, because of digital, and there's a lot of advantages to being able to call a lot of people together and do all that stuff. It's very wide, it's just not very deep. The relationships are not deep. And I think how do you have a growing sense of responsibility to other people if you're only connecting like through a huge thing as opposed to like interpersonal?
Yeah.
And being in the room, having to like stay, if you're gonna call someone out, then you're gonna hear back. It's like there are consequences, and that's what's I think hard nowadays is because everything is
It doesn't take a lot
interpersonal,
of courage
right.
to cut somebody off.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a
I mean,
blaze of courage.
Tita in ACT UP was the classic example of that.
Yeah.
Tita, I think, and now we get to a
Yeah.
person who anyway,
Yeah.
that I think was an incredibly negative.
I think it was negative.
Incredibly
Yeah.
negative. I think it was ad hominem attacks. It allowed people to say whatever. I think it also was used by police and other
think
people
so.
to stir trouble. And Tita was
Lots
tell it
of
to ACT UP. It was a weekly. You'd have a box and you'd submit comments, and then it would be typed up and sent around. And sometimes people would have names, sometimes people wouldn't, and it was brutal. And I think about what would have happened if we were online and that kind of shit happened, we never would have lasted. We wouldn't have lasted 3 months.
Pretty counterproductive.
Yeah.
It could be counterproductive.
Yep,
I'm
yep.
still scared. That person. But anyway, so
Be gone. He has no power here.
Well, two things. I just came from Fox News, so the voice is shot.
Yeah.
But the
Protesting
thing
Fox
we
News.
get
Let's be
from
clear.
the So Elizabeth was something that I see from both of you as individuals, but I think one of the great lessons of being and loving her, as so many of us did, is she had two things. One was a natural curiosity. And so one of the things that we're all guilty of as New Yorkers is that our me story is the first thing out of our mouths, as I'm Fox News. And so, but Elizabeth was genuinely, and I see this from you guys every time I see you, and I'm sure everybody does, your natural curiosity is something we can all nurture in each other to get past those terrible places with, there's somebody in your team that you probably could reach out to, maybe not this week, but there's some bridge building possible. The other thing was the legacy of people like Feingold. And I think, Ron, you were there, but I don't know if it was you or Jay or Andy had rounded us all up to go see Kiss Me Kate at Film Forum. And so it was like 50, 60 act uppers at the 3D screening of Kiss Me Kate. And at the end, when Grayson and Catherine Grayson and the Kiss.
Alfred Drake.
No,
it's
Howard Keel.
Howard Keel. When they
Don't
kissed,
test me.
all the good homos in the room all went, oh, and rising out of that was David going, ew. I have kept that going for 30 years. Every time someone says, fuck Trump. Ew.
Thank you, James. Thank you. Oh, good. Anything else? I mean, I'm just loved reading your book.
Oh, thank you. I was reading yours, on a screen.
Yeah, well, now I have the hard copy. I have the hard copy. I mean, I think it's an art, and I think it's an art that we can, and I see people like Kate who are able to navigate people and complicated people and people that are wounded.
Yeah.
And Kate, your skill in doing that, we all need to learn how do you navigate, because these are hard times. So navigating, my students say to me, I showed a video about Sylvia Rivera yesterday, and it's the wonderful Sylvia Rivera tribute video, but you see Sylvia being drunk and angry, you see Sylvia being homeless, you see, it's not Sylvia the saint, Sylvia many of us knew. And my students are like, how would you work with that person? And there's this sense of Sylvia's a person, human being, and how do we find that, see the humanity in that person and not be scared of this is somebody who's had a hard life.
Or even, actually, one of the things I was going to read and I didn't, which is again, about sort of the swim team, for instance, is I had this image in my head of what these very good-looking, guys would be and whatever, and actually, they turned out to be these lovely, kind of goofy guys. And if you read some of the stories, it's oh my God, and they lost a lover, and all this stuff. There was a lot more there. We have to be able to look past what is initially presented. People are not just their cover or whatever that line is, you know what I mean?
Thank you guys. Take your time. Thank you very much. Thanks for being here, everybody. Thank you. Come on in here. I'm lucky. I'm lucky to get to have you. Oh, thank you for having us.
guys.
All right, everybody, buy a book. Buy it.